I'm like, wow, that's a wild kind of thing to happen. I'm like, I did not expect
Yeah.
that.
Originally, I'm from Australia. So Japan is almost like a polar opposite to what I'm used to back in Australia. Um, like I guess I was always interested in Japanese history and things. Like I always had this idea of moving there at some point. Um, but yeah, I think some of the things that stand out is just how it's a really odd mix of really modern and um very efficient, but also there's a lot of really retro stuff mixed in. Um, for example, like when you're doing paperwork and things like that, they're still asking you to fax documents in and things. So they still use fax machines and stuff, which was pretty surprising. Um, I remember once I think it was my phone. I lost my phone on a train once. And in Australia, that means it's gone. Like you're never seeing it again. But a few days later, I got a call from the local police station, and they said like, "Oh, they got my phone. It was lost on a train. Like I think it fell out of my pocket." And they said I could come into the police station to pick it up. And when I went there, they still had all these like pneumatic tubes, like the tubes where they put messages in, and it uses air to push it up to different floors and stuff like that. So I filled out like a form to get my phone back, and then it went into a tube and went up a few floors, which is pretty interesting because I'd never seen anything like that before. And then at the same time, they're really advanced, like with the train system, it's like crazy. Like the like you can pretty much get almost everywhere on trains, high speed trains. We never really have to fly anywhere because the trains are so good. They run on time, something I'm not used to in Australia, and the metro and all that kind of stuff. And I guess also the medical stuff is also really advanced and well put together. So yeah, I think just the contrast between these retro sort of things and the really modern stuff is something that stood out to me initially.
Ben, so when you started kind of like getting into games, were games kind of part of that allure of Japan as well, or was it somewhere in the background?
Yeah, so I guess some of my background, like I've always played games. I played a lot of games, and I also used to play a lot with the level editors they used to come with. So a few games like the Thief series, I don't know if you're familiar with that. It had a level editor called Dromed, and also Team Fortress 2 and some Unreal Engine 3 stuff. So I used to always make really horrible levels using that. Um, but also I think I used to play a lot of military games, which kind of got me into the military. And so I actually ended up joining the Army Reserves in Australia when I was a teenager. And that was my plan. Like I was just going to stay and just once I finished high school, transfer to like full-time military, and that was it. But I honestly think playing a lot of Ghost Recon and stuff is what made me do that, as opposed to real proper um, kind of motives for that kind of thing. And it was actually my mother who kept pushing me to go to it's like a college for video game design sort of stuff. So she really pushed me, and I kept brushing it off like, no, I'm not interested. But I ended up, just to keep her happy and to keep her off my back, I basically went to a campus open day kind of thing where they show you a bit about the course and how it works and all that kind of thing. And yeah, I was really interested in it. Like it was all the stuff that I was really into. Um, I remember I remember one of the teachers there, he was asking me like, so what would you like to do? Like, what's your dream? And I said to him, like, I want to live in Japan and work in video games. And he basically laughed and said, like, that's never going to happen. Like, that's impossible. There's already so many good 3D artists in Japan. Like, why would they want someone else coming in like that? And in hindsight, I realized he was just trying to be like realistic and grounded. He didn't want to um like send us off on all these kind of fantasy dreams and things like that. He wanted us to keep it more realistic. And I think I graduated there in 2010. So at that time in Australia, the game development scene was very, very small, basically non-existent. Like, it's getting better now, but at that time there was basically nothing. So I realized he was trying to be helpful, but it didn't sway me at all. I kept going for that. And I basically graduated and there were no jobs, as he kind of implied, and I became a mailman for a few years after that. And at the same time, I was working on my personal art and a few scattered freelance things here and there. And then, like you said, like Japan was always an idea of mine. So I decided to leave Australia, go to Japan, where I knew there were a lot of really cool game companies, and just try to work there. But I didn't really have a solid plan, but I did actually make the move, and I moved to Japan. It must have been 2013, I think. And when I did that, I had to pay the rent and stuff. So I started doing English teaching, which is like the go-to job for a foreigner with no skills or talent in Japan. So I did that for a while, and then I managed to get an interview at it's kind of an outsourced studio that focuses more on film and TV kind of stuff. So I was really, really excited, like this could be like a foot in the door kind of thing. And I went down there and applied, and they brought me in to do an interview, which seemed to go okay. And they gave me an art test to see what my skills were like, which I completely failed. I just did so bad. I think the pressure made it so that I couldn't focus and do exactly what I wanted to do, and just got overwhelmed with panic and just didn't perform. So after that, I tried to explain and do a bit of damage control, and they ended up giving me a chance. Like, it was basically the lowest paid contractor position in this company, but I was so grateful for it because they were giving me a chance after I failed the test and all that kind of stuff. So I was super grateful for that, and I worked really, really hard, and I was really motivated just because of all that. Like not having a job in Australia, really trying for years to get into 3D and having no luck. And this was my first kind of chance to do that. So, I was doing really well in that job. And like within a year, I was leading the environment team for the company, which was pretty crazy. But again, it was more focused on film and TV. So it's 3D, but it's all, not real time basically. But that said, I got to work on Final Fantasy 15, and there was a Final Fantasy Kingsglaive movie that released at the same time. So I worked on that and a few anime things like Cyborg 009, if you're familiar with that. But for me, that was great. I learned a ton. So I did that for a couple of years, but in the back of my mind, I always had that idea of getting into games because that was my true, like, original passion. So I kept kind of tinkering with that and Unreal Engine and Unity in my spare time. I suppose I remember once I was playing Dark Souls 3 and like I couldn't finish the game because I just kept stopping and looking at the environments and taking screenshots, and like that game has a lot of really big vistas and like epic scenes. So I wasn't even fighting enemies. I'd clear the area so I could go and look at all the stuff. And I was really captivated by the visuals and the style. And that just got me so into like Dark Souls and Bloodborne and all that kind of thing. And it basically made FromSoftware my dream target company from that day forward. So I decided to try to remake a level from Dark Souls 3, the Farron Keep area, using Unreal Engine 4 at the time. And I think that's where I actually first came into contact with you. And 80 level and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we did an interview about that, and that was kind of like my next question, because you had this amazing jump from doing mail, and then you're like in Japan working in an outsourcing company, working for film, and you're obviously very good because you made this jump into, you know, very quickly into like the leading role. And I remember at the time when I saw some of your work, and I looked at these things. First of all, I'm a very big Dark Souls and Demon Souls fan. I mean, I even have like the stuff which I bought in Cologne at one of the Gamescoms, and I was looking at it. I thought, felt like, wow, this looks really nice, right? And I felt like, well, we definitely need to talk about it, because there was nothing there. It was just like a kind of like a little space, but the lighting was good, kind of like the ambience was good. And I thought, well, it really captured kind of like this spirit. And that was, I feel like it was, you know, like 2014, 2015 or something like that. It was a while. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, this is interesting. And tell us more, like, how did that story develop? Because I think something developed out of that.
Yeah, it did. So I was really, so basically I kept working on that level, and I was posting on the Polycount forums at the time. I decided to share a lot of whip stuff, so maybe that's some of the stuff you saw. And I was just going through there, and the community was really helpful, giving me tips and guiding me, especially because I'd been staring at it for so long. I miss a lot of things. So I was really grateful for that. But yeah, I did end up finishing that. I used to, because I was still working full time, but I'd wake up at like 7 a.m., do a couple of hours before work. In my lunch break at work, I would open the scene, do a bit more. And then when I got home, I worked until midnight and just repeated that for, I can't remember, must have been months of that. And then when I finally decided it was finished, I posted it on ArtStation, and it seemed to get a lot of really positive feedback. We did that article together on 80 level, and there's a lot of Japanese media picked up on it and that kind of thing, which I didn't even know about at the time. But I guess at the same time, I was trying to learn Unreal Engine, because I used Unreal Engine 3 and UDK, which it was called earlier. So I was trying to bridge that gap from that to Unreal Engine 4, but the main purpose of it was to try to use it to apply it from software. So basically I sent that in with a recruitment form off their website, which I had actually tried before and failed many times. So maybe just to get rid of me, they decided to answer it. And they were kind of, I guess after I sent that, they could see that I was trying to show that I could mimic their style. I understood their lighting, the theme, the mood, all that kind of stuff. And then, I basically got an interview with them. So I managed to fumble through a few interview rounds with my horrible Japanese, and a lot of help from one of their translators. And then, they basically gave me a chance to become a full-time member on their environment team, which was, that was the dream, like everything I was trying to achieve, which was really, really cool.
I remember I was very surprised to learn that you were actually working for FromSoftware, because we did that interview and then we kind of like haven't talked for a while, but I had you on my LinkedIn, and I'm like looking through, and then I suddenly see that you're working at the company, which I'm a super big fan. I own all their games, and I'm like, wow, that's a wild kind of thing to happen. I'm like, I did not expect that.
Yeah, so either did I.
Got there, and you got that position. Because like when you're talking about these Japanese companies, it's like it's always kind of like how we started this conversation. There's something quirky, something different, And I know that there are people who are saying that even companies in like Tokyo are different from companies who are like in Osaka or somewhere, where they have like the culture is different, their approach to games is different, like their thinking is different. Like when you just kind of started this, your journey there, like what were kind of like the things that you found most interesting, kind of like what was the most striking kind of, because I mean we can talk forever about about this, but kind of what are like the building blocks sort of like that you felt like this is like the foundation that everything's lying on.
Yeah, no, it is definitely different to what I guess you would consider, especially a Western studio or something like that. It's probably worth mentioning too that the first outsourcing studio I worked at was kind of mixed. It was like, I think the CEO was actually Australian, but there was a big mix of foreigners and Japanese, about half. So there was mixed language, all the documents were translated. And then FromSoftware was just full Japanese. I think when I joined, there were only two or three other foreigners. One of them was on the character team, and one of them was like a producer type person. So it was just full Japanese. And then in between those two, I actually worked at another company that was also very Japanese. So I feel like I had a good transition into that. So it wasn't too jarring or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, the interview process was very, very formal. There were 3 or 4 interviews, a lot of visiting the office, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, in terms of, I think also in Japan, the games, like the game scene is still fairly casual compared to most Japanese companies. Like everyone kind of dresses casually. To the exception of the interns, they often have like interns from a school and they're always in a black suit and tie and everything. But apart from that, it's fairly casual, I found. I did notice that they were not using the latest tools and stuff. Like they never used Unreal Engine. They have their own proprietary tools. They use 3ds Max for basically everything, which that was my main tool as well. So that worked really well for me. But yeah, they like when I first joined, we were using Photoshop for textures, 3ds Max for level design, and that was pretty much it. There was no Substance Designer, Substance Paint, or anything like that. So that was something I was getting my head around. But like, to their credit, like with their lower tech tools, they still managed to do some of the most amazing games, as you know, and some of the coolest character and environment designs. So it's just props to them, really. But yeah, so anyway, like it was really cool. It was a huge office. I remember inter-project communication was not encouraged. So you're not really meant to talk about your project with what your friend's project is or anything like that. But I remember from my seat, I could see the Sekiro team. So I was always watching what they're doing. Because this was so many years ago, Sekiro wasn't announced, so I had no idea what it was. But I remember thinking, oh, it looks like Tenchu, which was one of my favorite game series. So I was always watching that develop. But yeah, I was on the Elden Ring team. So we had a small team of about 6 or 7, I think it was. And yeah, we used to just come in and start working, and we always had like a daily meeting where we'd gather around the supervisor's PC and he'd go through what we submitted and he'd give feedback, and we'd see what other members had submitted and see their feedback, which was really helpful too. And I just, again, my Japanese was horrible, so I just nodded and smiled through most of the meetings. But I think through the context and like habit of knowing what we're talking about, I was able to kind of wing it through most of that. And yeah, I mean, all the people were super talented, so I learned a ton from the team. And I mean, yeah, I got to work on Elden Ring, which was amazing. I ended up working on a few different bits and pieces from the game. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Nocturne, the kind of like the underground cave that has a sky and all that kind of stuff. But most of my work was around Stormvale Castle. So the entry boss where you fight Margit, kind of a sub boss to get into the castle. I did all of that arena and the exterior of the castle and the interior. I didn't do it single-handedly, of course. There was 5 or 6 other people working on different areas of the castle. But yeah, that was amazing. And I worked a lot on the tops of the walls where those annoying eagles with the blade claws are and all the explosive barrels and that kind of stuff, which you might remember. But
so it's basically one of those biggest castles, or one of the biggest locations in Elden Ring, where there's a lot of kind of like Dark Souls, Demon Souls vibes there, like in the kind of like the culturally it's similar. So I have a question, kind of like on a couple of questions on that. But you were saying kind of like you were not alone and you worked on like a bunch of locations and kind of like the underground city and this castle and so on. When you think about the scope of Elden Ring, this is like nothing, right? Because this game is humongous. And my question is like, how do they even manage to do this? Like, it seems like the amount of work there is mind-boggling. Like, how is it even possible to do all of that?
Yeah, like, to be honest, I'm not 100% sure myself. I do know the game was in development for a very long time because, when I joined that, it must have been, God, I don't know, 2014 or 15-ish. And what Elden Ring was released a couple of years ago now, I think. But so that's a huge, huge development time. I think part of that was this is the first open world game. So we had an environment team that kind of focused on more of the, not instanced areas, but like the more handmade kind of areas like that castle. But there was a whole other separate open world team who worked on like the wider map where you're on the horse and you're exploring, and that was more focused on a lot of procedural stuff, kind of kit bash sets and all this kind of stuff for like fast, large area covering. But still, that doesn't really explain it because, as you said, it's just so expansive. But I think they also used a lot of outsourcing as well, with a lot of outsourced contractors that they actually bring into the studio. So they're just in there with everyone else working, and it was a huge, huge building. It had like 11 floors or something. I don't think all of it was FromSoftware, but the vast majority was. So yeah, I think it was just quite a big, very talented team, and a long time is how it got made, with that kind of scope, as you mentioned.
And with your kind of like having so many people on the team and kind of not knowing the language, did you get into this culture, or maybe, I mean, enlighten us, maybe there's no such thing, but like, did you guys kind of get together and go out every evening? Did you have beer or like the, fried meat or something like that? Was it part of the whole thing?
Yeah, it definitely was. That's another thing with Japanese culture. There's always like drinking after work on Fridays and all that kind of stuff. It was limited pretty much to our team, like our 5 to 6 person team. We didn't really mingle much with the others. I personally did a little bit just because they were the other foreigners and the other people who spoke English. So I used to hang out with the character artist a lot and the producer, because the producer also helped with a lot of translation stuff as well. But there were times we'd go out after with just our team, and then sometimes there were company-wide teams where Miyazaki would actually be in and he'd be addressing the whole company. They were fairly rare, maybe once every 1 or 2 months maximum. But and that was a really good opportunity to get like an overview of what's going on outside of my castle part in Elden Ring. But it wasn't really a social thing. We didn't really talk much to other people or anything like that. And like I mentioned before, they try to discourage talking about projects. So I didn't really hear much about Sekiro or anything like that. But yeah, that's generally the norm in Japan. A lot of drinking, a lot of izakayas and things like that, which I've gotten used to.
But when you were kind of working on the game, did you because my question is kind of connected a little bit with the way that they are kind of like being inspired, but what is kind of at the core of these stories that they're telling. And I didn't know this, like only recently did I know that a lot of those kind of like imagery and elements are inspired by Berserk manga. And yeah, I was super surprised and kind of like I looked at the reference and I thought, okay, so it's not like all kind of like because my thinking was if they made all of this up on their own, then this is just kind of like it's aliens came and they helped them plant a seed to build this game. So there's like a lot of that cultural kind of like anime and manga element that shaped this game in particular. And I think like in my perception, the kind of like the culture that is in Japan, it does influence the games that are being made there, you know, because when I look at like you know, I'm my wife bought me an Xbox, the new Xbox or whatever the name, because it's called Xbox XS and Xbox, and there's like the naming in Microsoft is weird. But I'm playing the latest Gears of War game. I think it's Gears of War 5, and I'm playing it, and it feels like a game of American football to me. Like, you know, I'm just going like through this, and I'm like, well, there's like these huge dudes who's like huge guns, and there's like chainsaws on those guns, and they're like blowing stuff up. It's just like Michael Bay written all over it. And then if you know, and if it's like you know, a Souls game, it's like in a completely different gear, and it's not that it's not bombastic or fun or loud. It's just like on a different layer. So with you kind of like working there and also working in Japan, do you feel like those cultural elements, like those faxes, like the, you know, even the food, do you think like there is a little bit of an impact on like what we get in the end as a product?
Yeah, definitely. Like you just said, like you can compare a big Western AAA to a Japanese and it'd be so different. And especially FromSoftware games, I think they're even more different to other Japanese games. But yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the traditional art style that they have here and the strong culture that's survived for thousands of years, very much intact. But yeah, like I used to play a ton of older Japanese games. Like I mentioned earlier, I used to play the Tenchu series, which I really liked because it wasn't that typical blow everything up, shoot everything as a soldier and, you know, the typical first person shooter that I also played a lot of. It was very dark and there was a lot of like supernatural stuff, and it was more related with stealth and like not being detected and trying to kill people without them noticing, which was a really big contrast to the action games. So, but I really resonated with that. And I think that's what sort of drew me to Japanese games in the first place. And yeah, I think it is like, it's hard to figure out the exact connection, but I do think that just the culture, anime, all that kind of stuff channels it into a way that makes it really unique to the rest of the world. Which is, yeah, that's part of the reason we opened up a second studio in Tokyo, is to try to get more artists that are good with that kind of stuff. Because between the artists in Australia and the artists in Japan, there's a different skill set. Generally, the ones in Australia are always on top of like the latest tools. They've all used Unreal 5 already. They they're really good with Substance Designer and things like that. But in Japan, they're a bit slower with adopting tools, but they're generally really strong with traditional art skills like drawing, sketching, painting. And like if I could ask each artist to do the same character design and they'd both have a very different take on that. So it's really hard to put into words, but like I do see a lot of value in that different Japanese kind of approach to things, which, like you said, I think derives from the culture and all that kind of stuff. So.
You know what? I totally understand what you mean. Like you're saying this, and I feel like if you give me models, even if it's like the same kind of like hard surface stuff made in by people in different cultures, because I feel like it's almost like a school of thought, a school of thought on like modeling and texturing, kind of design in general. That is quite different. And then with you kind of like doing this work that you do, it makes total sense to kind of like try and hire local talent to get that particular look, because companies do that all the time. When companies from like Eastern Europe, they want to go and create a product suitable for like United States, they go to United States, they hire local producers, they try to hire local, modelers and animators, just to get even things like animation, right? Even the movement is a little bit different, right? And their thinking about this is different and so on. But you mentioned that you have your own company, and you have these offices in Australia and in Japan, and kind of like to switch gears a little bit. How did you feel, running a business in Japan with the faxes and everything? And also, I think it's very slow. I feel like Japan is kind of like the Germany of Asia, where it's like you need to go through, a bunch of different, government bodies, and you need to file a ton of paperwork and agreements and stuff. It doesn't seem like it's a very easy process. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so I did all of the original Upsurge Studios in Australia, and that was pretty straightforward for me because it's my home country and it's fairly loose in comparison to Japan. But when I came back to Japan in must have been 2020, around then, and decided to set up Upsurge Studios East in Tokyo, I actually did it with a co-founder this time. And he's a Japanese guy that I met in that very first outsourcing company that I worked at. And we worked together on a lot of different projects, like the Final Fantasy one. He was a kind of a project manager, producer type person. He wasn't an artist, but I knew from my experience of working and living in Japan that setting up a company here, like you said, is going to be a lot more work than what I thought it might be if I tried to apply what I did in Australia and just like copy paste it to Japan. And yeah, I was not surprised there. There was a ton of different licenses we had to get. I had to get like a little hanko. It's like a stamp for signing documents. So with these more formal business things like creating a company and registering, they don't actually allow you to sign it. Oh, you've got one there, do you? Yeah, something like that.
I got this one. Yeah, I know what you mean. So basically, it's like a signature. Yeah. Like we signed contracts in China, and they have the same thing. Then you need to get a.
Oh, okay.
You need to do the stamp there as well.
Yeah, so they don't accept like a typical signature, right? Yeah, so that was another kind of traditional thing I had to get my head around, and because my name is in alphabet instead of Japanese characters. Like when I went to the city office to do it, there was all this umming and ahhing and head scratching and checking with the manager if this was okay. And finally they let me have it. But with that, there was a ton of different documents we had to do, but having him there really helped it. I think without a Japanese co-founder who knows the language, who knows the processes and all that, it would have been basically impossible. So yeah, like you mentioned before, you need that local help that's specific to what you're trying
And
to do.
I'm guessing it's kind of like also important to have that local kind of boots on the ground to get clients, because it doesn't seem like it's a very easy kind of market to get into.
No, it's probably, like, I can't speak for a lot of countries, but I feel like it's one of the more difficult markets to get into. So in Australia, like, Australian game dev scene, it's not huge, but it is growing. There's a few big companies moving there. But from Australia, it's very easy to access the UK, the US, Europe, just through English and a similar business culture, I suppose. But basically impossible to get into Japan. So the whole reason we created the second studio was because of what you just said, how difficult it is to break into, because even with their art outsourcing, they don't want to go outside of Japan in general. I know they do with China and stuff like that, but it's very limited in comparison to the amount of outsourcing that's going on. Like, even Elden Ring had a huge amount, and they actually made them come into the office. A lot of them were Chinese nationals who had to move to Japan and come to work in the office. So I think that shows how hesitant they are to send stuff out. So yeah, having a studio here with local artists and my co-founder is the only way to have a chance to crack into that, I think. But once you are here, it's a lot. It opens a lot of doors. Like, it's not easy, but it opens a lot of doors because there's a lot of face-to-face visits. They want to come to your office. They want you to come into their office to have meetings instead of Zoom or things like that. And also the business style is another thing worth mentioning, because in Australia, I can almost have a passive marketing where if I just keep a strong portfolio, a strong art station, whatever, you get contacts. Like, it's pretty random, but you do get a steady flow of people inquiring and asking for work. But in Japan, that basically doesn't work. They don't really use ArtStation. Companies will have a portfolio, but it's not that important. Really, these kind of, as we're discovering in our last 18 months of having a studio in Japan, is that there's a lot of, you have to go have dinner with this CEO, and then he invites a producer who you go drinking with till 3 a.m. on a Friday night. And you just kind of repeat that, and that's how you get business. And to do that, you basically need to be Japanese. Like, even if you speak Japanese really well, you're always seen as a bit of a, like, outsider, like foreigner, because of how the country is and how monogamous it is and all that kind of stuff. So having my Japanese business partner, he is Japanese, so he can fully talk with all the nuances and fully like engage with other Japanese and stuff. So it's basically you can't get into it without actually being here, in my opinion.
Ben, so we're kind of almost at the end. I know you don't have a lot of time. I have one kind of like last question for you. So if you are, you can probably go on 80 level and ask a question: do you want to work in a Japanese game company? And you will get 1,000 or maybe 10,000 people saying yes. I would love to do it. For those people who are maybe still in school, or they're kind of like in some kind of crossroads in their career, what would be kind of like your advice? What would you say? How to even kind of like get your foot in the door? Like,
yeah, that's interesting. I get a lot of emails and stuff like that myself. I would say that the best thing to do is just try to get into Japan first, because like the outsourcing, I think they're going to be very hesitant to hire someone from outside and worry about visa process, flights, getting them in the country. It just makes you more difficult to hire than one of the people right here. So I would say just move to Japan first and expect to support yourself on a non-game related job, or if you have some remote work or something like that. I used a working holiday visa, which is a really nice visa because you can just come without having a job. So it's kind of a mix between a holiday, but you can work. So it's very flexible. I know it depends on your country, so not all countries can do that. But another way is becoming a student. So you can become a student at a Japanese language school. You're allowed to work a certain amount of hours each week doing that. So whatever the easiest way to get there for your country, I'll just get here first and then start applying to companies, start learning the language, start networking, because once you're actually here, you open up a lot more doors than sending emails from your home country. And I'd also recommend, especially if you're not super strong with the Japanese language, finding one of these mixed studios. So like Upsurge Studios East, we're very mixed. We've got a lot of foreigners and Japanese. That first outsourced company, it's called Tone Plus. That's also a mixed one. So they can be a good way to get used to the culture, learn a lot, not be dropped directly into a Japanese company, and give you some time to acclimatize. But yeah, I think the main thing is just being here first before you start applying to all the really cool companies here.
All right, Ben. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you. We'll leave the links in the description so people can check out the website and, maybe apply.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Cool. Thanks heaps, man. That was really cool.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.